I'm standing in my childhood living room, watching my 5-year-old niece tear through her seventh gift of the morning, while my parents beam like she's just discovered the cure for cancer. The wrapping paper mountain beside her could bury a small car. Meanwhile, the single gift I brought for her sits forgotten under the tree, and the box I'm clutching in my white-knuckled hands feels heavier with each passing second. My mother is actually filming Riley opening another American Girl doll, the third one this Christmas, while my father adjusts the lighting like this is some Hollywood production. "Oh, Riley, you're so special. Grandma and Grandpa love you so much," Mom coos into the camera. My brother Jake leans back on the couch with that smug smile I've grown to hate, watching his daughter get showered with more gifts than most kids see in a lifetime. His wife Sarah scrolls through her phone, probably already planning which photos will get the most likes on Instagram. But they don't know what's in this box. They don't know that everything is about to change. I've been the forgotten daughter for 32 years, the one who got a sweater while my brother got a car, the one who paid her own way through college while he got a full ride courtesy of mom and dad's savings account, the one whose achievements were met with, "That's nice, honey," while his mediocre efforts got standing ovations. Today, that ends. "Aunt Emma," Riley suddenly notices me standing there. "Did you bring me something?" The room goes quiet. All eyes turn to me, and I can see the familiar look in my parents' eyes, that mixture of obligation and disappointment, like they're remembering they have another child. I hold up the box, feeling its weight, feeling the power of what's inside. "I did, sweetheart, but this isn't just for you. I need to take you back to understand how we got here, to understand why this moment matters so much. I'm Emma Catherine Sullivan, 32 years old, and I've been living in the shadow of my golden child brother Jake for as long as I can remember. While other families might try to hide their favoritism, mine has always worn it like a badge of honor. Growing up, the differences were subtle at first. Jake got the bigger bedroom because boys need more space. He got the newer clothes because he grows so fast. He got to quit piano lessons after 2 months because he's just not musical, while I was forced to continue for 6 years despite begging to try soccer instead. But it was the Christmas mornings that really drove the knife in. Every year, without fail, Jake's side of the tree would be overflowing while mine looked like an afterthought. The explanations were always ready. "Your brother appreciates electronics more," or "We thought you'd prefer practical gifts," or my personal favorite, "You're just so easy to shop for." Easy to shop for, translation, we didn't think about you until the last minute. The pattern continued through high school. When Jake barely scraped by with C's, my parents hired tutors and celebrated every small improvement like he'd just invented fire. When I graduated as valedictorian, they missed my speech because Jake had a baseball game. A JV baseball game, where he spent most of the time warming the bench. College was where the favoritism became impossible to ignore. My parents had been saving for our education since we were born, or so I thought. Turns out, they'd been saving for Jake's education. When he got into state university with his 2.8 GPA and mediocre SAT scores, they paid his entire tuition, room, board, and even gave him a generous monthly allowance. I had worked my ass off to get into Northwestern with a partial academic scholarship. When I approached them for help with the remaining tuition, my father actually laughed. "Emma, you're so smart and independent. You don't need our help like Jake does. Besides, he's studying business. That's a real career path." I was planning to double major in journalism and political science, with dreams of becoming an investigative reporter. Apparently, that wasn't real enough. So I took out loans, massive loans. I worked 3 jobs during college: tutoring, waitressing, and writing for the campus newspaper. I graduated summa cum laude with a degree I'd earned entirely on my own merit, while Jake partied his way to a business degree he'd never use. After graduation, I moved to Chicago and worked my way up in journalism. It wasn't easy. The industry was already struggling when I entered it, and being a young woman in newsrooms dominated by old men came with its own set of challenges. I took every assignment no one else wanted, worked weekends, holidays, whatever it took. I specialized in corporate corruption and financial fraud investigations. My breakthrough came when I exposed a city councilman who'd been funneling public funds to his wife's catering company. That story led to his resignation and my first journalism award. I was 28 and finally feeling like I'd proven myself. My parents' reaction? That's nice, dear. Did you see Jake got promoted to assistant manager at the cell phone store? Jake, meanwhile, had bounced from job to job since college. He tried selling insurance, working at a gym, managing a restaurant, and about 5 other ventures that all ended with him quitting or getting fired. Each time, my parents were there with money, connections, or excuses about why it wasn't his fault. When he was 30, he met Sarah at a bar. She was 24, worked part-time at a boutique, and had the kind of bubbly personality that made my parents think she was such a sweet girl. Never mind that she had no real ambitions beyond becoming an Instagram influencer and finding someone to take care of her. They got engaged after 6 months. My parents threw them an engagement party that cost more than my annual salary. They paid for a wedding that could have funded a small nation. They bought them a house, not a down payment, the entire house, because young couples need help getting started. I'd been living in a studio apartment and eating ramen for dinner most nights, still paying off my student loans. 2 years later, Sarah got pregnant with Riley. You'd have thought she was carrying the next Messiah based on my family's reaction. My mother immediately converted the guest room into a nursery for when Riley visited. My father started talking about college funds before the baby was even born. The day Riley arrived, my parents practically moved into Jake and Sarah's house. Mom was there every day, cooking, cleaning, helping with the baby. Dad installed a swing set in their backyard and bought a minivan for the family. I was living 2 hours away in Chicago at the time, working 60-hour weeks on a major investigation into pension fraud. When I couldn't make it to every family dinner or baby milestone, I was labeled as career-obsessed and selfish. The first Christmas after Riley was born was when I really understood how deep this favoritism ran. Riley, who was barely 6 months old and had no concept of presents, received enough gifts to stock a toy store. I got a scarf from Target with the price tag still on it. But it wasn't just about the gifts. It was about the attention, the photos, the way every sound Riley made was treated like she'd just recited Shakespeare. My parents set up social media accounts just to post pictures of their granddaughter. They bragged to neighbors, coworkers, strangers in the grocery store. I kept trying to connect with them, to find some way back into their hearts. I'd send articles I'd written, hoping they'd be proud. I'd call to tell them about awards or promotions. I'd drive down for holidays and family events, even when work was crazy. Nothing worked. Every conversation somehow circled back to Jake and Sarah and Riley. Every achievement of mine was met with polite disinterest, followed immediately by 20 minutes about Riley's latest adorable antic. 2 years ago, I won a state journalism award for my exposé on a corrupt housing authority that led to federal charges against 3 officials. It was the biggest story of my career, picked up by national outlets, resulted in congressional hearings. My parents' reaction? Oh, that's wonderful, honey. Speaking of housing, did we tell you Jake and Sarah are thinking about getting a bigger place? We're going to help them look at some beautiful neighborhoods. That was my breaking point. Not just the dismissal of my achievement, but the seamless transition to more help for Jake, more support, more attention, more everything. I realized I'd been waiting my entire adult life for them to see me, to value me, to give me even a fraction of the love and support they showered on Jake. I'd been killing myself trying to earn something they'd never be willing to give. So I stopped trying. I stopped calling every week, stopped driving down for every birthday and barbecue, stopped sending updates about my life that no one cared about anyway. I focused on building my own life, my own success, my own happiness. It took them 3 months to notice I wasn't calling as much. Their solution? To tell me I was becoming distant and needed to prioritize family more. Because apparently, the problem wasn't that they ignored me, it was that I wasn't grateful enough for being ignored. The irony is, my career flourished once I stopped seeking their approval. I got hired by a major newspaper, started breaking bigger stories, won more awards. I bought my own condo, traveled to places I'd always wanted to see, built a life I was genuinely proud of. But holidays were still torture. What would you do if your family treated you like you were invisible? Comment below. I want to hear your stories. Every Christmas, every Easter, every birthday became a performance where I played the role of the grateful daughter while watching my parents worship at the altar of their precious son and his family. The gift disparity became more extreme each year, like they were trying to set some kind of record. Last Christmas, Riley got a motorized Jeep that cost more than most people's rent. I got bath salts. This year was supposed to be different, though. This year, I had something they didn't know about, something that would finally force them to see what they'd been doing all these years. The final straw came 3 weeks ago, though the betrayal itself goes back much further than that. I was at work, deep in research for a story about municipal budget mismanagement, when my phone rang. It was my Aunt Linda, my mother's older sister, calling from Phoenix where she'd moved after her retirement. Emma, sweetheart, I need to tell you something, and I don't think your parents are ever going to tell you themselves. Aunt Linda had always been different from my mother. Where Mom was passive-aggressive and conflict-avoidant, Linda was direct. She'd been the one family member who occasionally called out my parents' obvious favoritism, though they'd always dismissed her concerns as interfering. "What's going on, Aunt Linda?" "It's about your grandmother's will, your Grandma Rose." My heart sank. Grandma Rose had passed away 5 years ago, and her funeral had been another painful reminder of my place in the family hierarchy. My parents had spent most of the service talking about how much she'd loved Jake and Riley, with barely a mention of the close relationship I'd had with her. Grandma Rose had been my sanctuary growing up. When my parents were too busy fawning over Jake to notice me, I could always count on afternoons at her house. She taught me to cook her famous apple pie, listened to my teenage problems, and was the only family member who seemed genuinely interested in my dreams of becoming a journalist. "What about the will?" I asked, though I was already bracing myself for disappointment. "Emma, your grandmother left you something significant, but your parents, they never told you." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What do you mean they never told me?" Linda's voice was heavy with regret. "Rose left you her house, Emma, the family home where your mother grew up. She left it to you specifically, along with all her jewelry and a substantial savings account she'd been building for years." I couldn't breathe. That's impossible. Mom and Dad said she left everything to be divided between her children. That's what they told everyone. But Rose came to me before she died, Emma. She was worried about how your parents treated you. She saw it, even when everyone else pretended not to. She wanted to make sure you were taken care of, that you got something that was truly yours. My hands were shaking, but the house was sold. They sold it 6 months after she died. I know, honey, that's the part that breaks my heart. The room was spinning. "Aunt Linda, what are you telling me?" "Your parents forged your signature on the documents to sell the house. They told the lawyer you were too busy with work to handle the estate details yourself, and that you'd ask them to manage everything. They sold the house, kept the proceeds, and split what they claimed was the total inheritance between all the grandchildren." I felt like I was going to vomit. How much? The house sold for $340,000. The savings account had another $85,000. The jewelry was appraised at about $15,000. Emma, your grandmother left you almost $500,000. And what did I receive? Linda's voice was barely a whisper. According to the paperwork your parents filed, your share of the divided estate was $8,000. $8,000. That's what they'd given me, claiming it was my equal share of Grandma Rose's modest estate. I'd even been grateful for it at the time, using it to pay down some of my student loans. They'd stolen nearly $450,000 from me. "Linda, why are you telling me this now?" "Because I found the original will when I was going through some papers Rose had asked me to keep safe. I also have copies of the forged documents, Emma. Your parents had a lawyer friend of theirs handle the estate, and I don't think he looked too closely at the signatures. But I had Rose notarize the will when she wrote it, and I kept copies of everything." This is fraud, this is theft." "I know, sweetheart. The question is, what do you want to do about it?" I sat in my office for 3 hours after that call, staring at the wall, trying to process what I'd just learned. My parents hadn't just favored Jake my entire life, they'd actively stolen from me. They'd taken money my grandmother specifically left to me and used it to continue funding their golden child's lifestyle. Over the next few days, Linda sent me copies of all the documents. The original will was crystal clear. To my granddaughter Emma Catherine Sullivan, I leave my home at 847 Maple Street, along with all jewelry, savings accounts, and personal effects, in recognition of her loving care and attention throughout my life. There was also a letter from Grandma Rose that Linda had been instructed to give me after the estate was settled. Reading it broke my heart all over again. My dearest Emma asterisk. If you're reading this, I'm gone, but I hope you know how proud I am of the woman you've become. You've accomplished so much on your own, without the help and support your brother has always received. I've watched your parents favor Jake your entire life, and it's broken my heart. You deserved so much better than that. You deserved parents who celebrated your achievements, who supported your dreams, who saw your worth. This house is yours now. I hope you'll think of it as more than just an inheritance. Think of it as recognition of your value, your independence, your strength. You earned this through years of loving me when I was forgotten by everyone else. I also hope you'll use this gift to build the life you want, free from the need to prove yourself to people who refuse to see your worth. All my love asterisk. Grandma Rose asterisk. I cried reading that letter, not just from grief but from rage. My grandmother had seen me, had valued me, had tried to give me something that would change my life, and my parents had stolen it. The betrayal was so complete, so calculating, that it took my breath away. They hadn't just taken money from me, they'd taken my grandmother's final act of love and recognition. But Linda had given me something even more valuable than the money: proof, documentation, evidence of exactly what they'd done. Has your family ever betrayed you like this? Comment your story. Sometimes we need to know we're not alone. I spent the next 2 weeks consulting with lawyers, understanding my options. The statute of limitations hadn't run out. I could pursue criminal charges for fraud and forgery. I could sue for the full amount plus damages. I could destroy their reputations, their financial security, their relationship with Jake and Sarah. But I realized I wanted something different, something more poetic. I wanted them to face what they'd done in front of the family they'd prioritized over me. I wanted Jake and Sarah to see their precious benefactors for who they really were. I wanted Riley to witness the moment when the grandparents who spoiled her were exposed as thieves. I wanted truth in its most devastating form. So I planned for Christmas morning. I had all the documents copied and organized. I had Linda on standby to confirm everything if needed. I had lawyers ready to file charges the moment I gave them the word. But most importantly, I had a box. A simple white box with a red ribbon, sitting innocuously under the tree with all of Riley's expensive gifts. Inside that box was every piece of evidence of their betrayal, along with a letter I'd written explaining exactly what they'd done and what was going to happen next. They thought this would be another Christmas, where they could shower Jake's family with gifts while throwing me scraps. They thought they could continue their decades-long pattern of favoring him while keeping me in the dark about what they'd stolen from me. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The 3 weeks between Linda's call and Christmas morning were like watching a slow-motion car crash, except I was the only one who could see it coming. I decided to test everyone in my family to see who knew what and how they'd react when given the chance to do the right thing. The results were illuminating. My first test was with Jake himself. I drove down to visit him and Sarah the weekend after I learned the truth, telling them I wanted to spend some quality time with Riley before Christmas. We were sitting in their living room, the living room in the house my stolen inheritance had helped them buy, while Riley played with toys that probably cost more than most families' monthly grocery budget. Sarah was showing me her latest Instagram photos, completely oblivious to the storm brewing beneath my surface. "Jake," I said during a moment when Sarah went to get us coffee, "I've been thinking a lot about Grandma Rose lately." His face immediately shifted, becoming guarded. "Yeah, why's that?" "Just wondering if you ever think about her will. You know, how the estate was handled." Jake's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Mom and Dad handled all that. Why are you bringing it up?" "I've been trying to remember exactly what she left. It all happened so fast after the funeral, and I was dealing with work stress. Emma, Jake's voice carried a warning tone I'd never heard before. What's this about? I studied my brother's face, looking for any sign of guilt, remorse, or even confusion that might suggest he didn't know what our parents had done. What I saw instead was the face of someone who absolutely knew and was preparing his defenses. I'm just curious about the details, that's all. Do you remember how much the house sold for? Jake stood up abruptly. I don't know why you're digging into this stuff, Em. Grandma's gone. The estate was settled fairly. Mom and Dad made sure everyone got their share. Their fair share of what exactly? Of what she left. Look, if you're having money problems, just say so. Sarah and I are doing well, we could probably help you out. The condescension in his voice made my blood boil, but I kept my expression neutral. I'm not having money problems, Jake. I'm doing very well, actually. Then, why are you asking about inheritance money from 5 years ago? Sarah returned with coffee, immediately sensing the tension. What are you guys talking about? Emma's asking about Grandma Rose's will, Jake said, his eyes never leaving mine. Sarah's perfectly contoured face scrunched in confusion. Why would you? Oh, her expression shifted to something that might have been sympathy if it weren't so patronizing. Emma, are you feeling left out about Christmas gifts again? Because you know Jake and I would be happy to get you something nicer if you just tell us what you want. The casual cruelty of that statement, the assumption that I was petty enough to dig into my dead grandmother's estate because I was jealous of Christmas presents, showed me everything I needed to know about Sarah's character. But Jake's reaction was worse. Instead of defending me or correcting his wife's cruel assumption, he nodded along. Sarah's right. We all know Mom and Dad go overboard with Riley, but that's just because she's the only grandkid. It's not personal, Em. Not personal? As if systematic favoritism spanning 3 decades could somehow not be personal. I see, I said, standing up. Well, I should get going. Traffic back to Chicago, you know. Jake walked me to the door, and for a moment I thought he might say something real, something honest. Instead, he put his hand on my shoulder and said, Emma, I love you, but you've always been a little intense about family stuff. Maybe you should talk to someone about it. My own brother was gaslighting me, suggesting I needed therapy because I was asking questions about an inheritance that was rightfully mine. The next test came with my parents directly. I called them that Tuesday evening, using my most casual voice. Hey, Mom. I was going through some old papers and found that check from Grandma Rose's estate. I wanted to make sure I thanked you and Dad properly for handling all those details when I was so swamped with work. Mom's voice immediately became tight. Of course, honey, we were happy to take care of everything. It was so generous of her to leave something for all the grandchildren. I keep meaning to ask, how did she decide to split things up? Long pause. Well, you know your grandmother. She always wanted to be fair to everyone. Right, but I mean the specific amounts. I remember getting that $8,000, but I never saw the actual will. Did she leave specific dollar amounts, or did you and Aunt Linda have to calculate percentages? Another pause, longer this time. Emma, why are you asking about this? No particular reason. I was just curious about how these things work. I might need to write my own will soon, for work purposes, and I wanted to understand how Grandma structured hers. Honey, I think it's better not to dwell on these things. Your grandmother loved you very much, and that's what matters. Of course, Mom. I'm just interested in the legal structure. Do you still have a copy of the will? I'd love to read her words. I don't know where those papers are anymore. Your father might have filed them somewhere. I could hear Dad in the background asking what was wrong. Mom covered the phone, but I caught muffled words. Emma and Will and questions. When she came back on the line, her voice had changed completely. Emma Catherine Sullivan, I don't know what's gotten into you lately, but this obsession with money and inheritances is very unattractive. Your grandmother left you what she wanted to leave you, and that's the end of it. Emma Catherine Sullivan, my full name like I was a child being scolded. I wasn't obsessing, Mom, I was just. You were just stirring up trouble, like you always do when things aren't going your way. I think you need to focus on gratitude instead of greed. She hung up on me. My mother, who had stolen nearly $500,000 from her own daughter, hung up on me for asking about it and called me greedy. The third test was the most painful. Aunt Linda herself. Linda, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Of course, Emma. How long have you known about the will, about what my parents did? Silence stretched between us for nearly a minute. Linda. I've known since right after your grandmother died, Emma. The words hit me like a physical blow. You've known for 5 years. And yes. And you never said anything. You watched them steal from me for 5 years and said nothing. Emma, please understand. Understand what? That my entire family conspired to rob me and then gaslight me about it. Linda's voice broke. I wanted to tell you so many times, but Rose made me promise to wait. Wait for what? She was afraid that if you knew immediately, you'd be so hurt and angry that you'd cut off the family completely. She hoped that maybe, over time, your parents would feel guilty and make it right on their own. 5 years, Linda. 5 years of watching me struggle with student loans while Jake got handed everything. 5 years of watching me get treated like an afterthought at every family gathering. 5 years of Christmas mornings where I got scraps while they showered Jake's family with gifts bought with my inheritance money. I know, and I'm so sorry. Why now? Why are you telling me now? Linda sighed heavily. Because your grandmother also made me promise that if they hadn't made it right by your 32nd birthday, I had to tell you everything. She said 5 years was long enough to wait for people to develop a conscience. My 32nd birthday had been 2 months ago. So everyone knew, I said quietly. Jake knew, my parents knew, you knew, and all of you decided I wasn't entitled to the truth. Emma. I hung up on her too. Have you ever discovered that everyone in your family was lying to you? How did you handle it? Drop your story in the comments. The final test came from the most unexpected source, Riley herself. I went to see her one more time before Christmas, telling Jake and Sarah I wanted to bring her an early gift. They were happy to let me babysit for a few hours while they went Christmas shopping, probably using money that should have been mine. Riley was 5 now, old enough to have real conversations, and I'd always enjoyed our time together despite everything else. She was innocent in all of this, and I genuinely loved her. We were coloring in her playroom when she looked up at me with those big blue eyes and said, Aunt Emma, why are Mommy and Daddy always whispering about you? My crayon froze mid-stroke. What do you mean, sweetheart? They whisper about you a lot, and Grandma and Grandpa too. They say words I don't understand, but they look worried. What kind of words? Riley scrunched up her face, trying to remember. Daddy said you were asking too many questions, and Mommy said you might cause trouble at Christmas. Grandma said you were being ingrateful. She sounded out the syllable carefully. Ungrateful. They were calling me ungrateful for asking about money they'd stolen from me. And Grandpa said something about keeping you happy so you don't. Riley trailed off, looking confused. Don't what, honey? I don't remember, but they all looked scared when he said it. So they knew I was suspicious. They were worried about what I might do or say. And instead of coming clean, instead of admitting what they'd done and trying to make it right, they were strategizing about how to keep me happy. I realized then that every single person in my family, except for Riley, had failed the test of basic human decency. They'd all chosen to protect the lie rather than acknowledge the truth. They'd all decided that maintaining their comfortable fiction was more important than treating me fairly. Jake knew what our parents had done and had actively tried to gaslight me out of investigating it. My parents were not only the architects of the betrayal, but were doubling down by calling me greedy and ungrateful. Even Linda, who I'd thought was my ally, had been complicit for 5 years. None of them had any intention of ever making this right. They were all perfectly content to let me live the rest of my life, never knowing that my grandmother had tried to give me financial security and that they'd stolen it from me. But they'd made one critical mistake in their calculations. They assumed I would never find out the truth. Christmas morning was going to be a very different kind of family gathering than they were expecting. As I prepared to leave Riley that day, she hugged me tight and said, "Aunt Emma, are you going to make everyone upset at Christmas?" I kissed the top of her head and said, "Sometimes, sweetheart, grown-ups need to hear the truth even when it makes them upset. Will you still love me after you tell them the truth?" That broke my heart. This little girl somehow understood that something big was coming, and she was worried about losing me in the aftermath. "Riley, I will always love you, no matter what happens with the grown-ups. That's a promise." She nodded solemnly, like she was filing that promise away for safekeeping. I walked out of that house, knowing that I was about to detonate a bomb in the middle of my family. Some relationships would probably never recover. Some people might never forgive me for forcing them to face what they'd done. But I also knew that I couldn't continue living a lie. I couldn't keep pretending to be grateful for scraps while they lived off money that was rightfully mine. I couldn't keep playing the role of the forgotten daughter while they all conspired to keep me in the dark about the grandmother who had actually seen my worth. The box was wrapped and ready. The evidence was organized. The lawyers were on standby. Christmas morning couldn't come fast enough. Christmas morning dawned crisp and clear, the kind of perfect winter day that would have felt magical if I wasn't about to destroy my family's carefully constructed lies. I arrived at my parents' house at 10 a.m. sharp, the designated gift opening time that had been the same for as long as I could remember. My hands were steady as I carried the white box with the red ribbon, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. Mom answered the door with her usual forced brightness. "Emma, right on time, we were just getting started." The living room was already in chaos. Riley had apparently been up since dawn, and there were torn wrapping papers scattered everywhere. She was currently pulling a life-size stuffed unicorn out of a box that was bigger than she was, while my parents filmed every moment of her delight. Jake was assembling what looked like a professional-grade art easel, and Sarah was organizing presents into Instagram-worthy piles. The scene was exactly what I'd expected, a shrine to Riley's happiness funded by money that had been stolen from me. "Emma," Riley ran over and hugged my legs. "Look what Grandma and Grandpa got me." I looked around at the ridiculous excess. There had to be thousands of dollars worth of gifts already opened, and the pile under the tree suggested there were more to come. "I see that, sweetheart. They certainly got you a lot of things." Mom beamed with pride. "We just love spoiling our grandbaby. She's so special." "She certainly is," I agreed, setting my box under the tree next to a wrapped bicycle that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "Emma brought you something too, Riley," Sarah said with barely concealed condescension. "Isn't that nice of her?" I watched my parents exchange a look, the same look they'd been giving each other my entire life when forced to acknowledge my existence. That look that said, "Oh right, we have another child, don't we?" "Actually," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the room, "before we get to the rest of the presents, I have something I need to say. Something I need to share with everyone." The room went quiet. Even Riley stopped playing with her unicorn and looked at me with those perceptive 5-year-old eyes. Dad cleared his throat. "Emma, this is Christmas morning. Can't whatever it is wait until after?" "No, Dad, it can't wait. It's waited 5 years too long already." I walked over to the tree and picked up the white box, feeling its weight, feeling the power of what was inside. This box contains something that belongs to all of us, but especially to me. Something that I just learned about 3 weeks ago. Mom's face had gone pale. "Emma, I don't think." "Mom, I know about Grandma Rose's will." The words dropped into the room like stones into still water, creating ripples of shock that I could see spreading across everyone's faces. Jake went rigid. Sarah looked confused. Riley tilted her head like she was trying to understand something beyond her comprehension. But my parents looked terrified. "I know about the real will," I continued, my voice steady and clear. "I know about the house she left me. I know about the savings account. I know about the jewelry. And I know what you did with all of it." Dad stood up slowly, his face flushed. "Emma, I don't know what you think you know, but—" "I know everything, Dad, everything." I untied the red ribbon and opened the box, pulling out the first document, a copy of Grandma Rose's original will. This is a copy of the will that Grandma Rose had notarized at Aunt Linda's suggestion. The will that left me her house at 847 Maple Street, her savings accounts totaling $85,000, and all her personal jewelry. Sarah gasped. Jake buried his face in his hands. The house that you told me was sold to cover her debts. It sold for $340,000. The savings account that you told me was almost empty. It had $85,000 in it. The jewelry that you said had no real value? It was appraised at $15,000. I pulled out the next set of documents. These are copies of the forged documents you submitted to the court. Documents with my signature, a signature I never made, agreeing to let you handle the estate and distribute everything equally among the grandchildren. Mom sank into her chair like her strings had been cut. Emma, please. Please what, Mom? Please continue pretending you didn't steal almost $500,000 from your own daughter. The silence in the room was deafening. Riley had stopped playing completely and was staring at the adults with wide, frightened eyes. Jake finally looked up, his face a mixture of guilt and defiance. Emma, you don't understand the whole situation. Don't I? I pulled out another document. This is a letter from Grandma Rose, given to Aunt Linda to hold until the estate was settled. Would you like me to read what she wrote about how you've all treated me my entire life? Emma, stop. Dad's voice was sharp, commanding, the voice he'd used when I was a child and had dared to question their authority. But I wasn't a child anymore. She wrote, I've watched your parents favor Jake your entire life, and it's broken my heart. You deserved so much better than that. You deserved parents who celebrated your achievements, who supported your dreams, who saw your worth. Mom started crying, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of a woman who'd been caught and knew her comfortable lies were crumbling. She knew, I continued, my voice growing stronger. Grandma Rose saw exactly what all of you have done to me, and she tried to make it right. She left me that house so I'd have security, so I'd have something that was truly mine, and you stole it. Sarah, who had been silent through all of this, suddenly found her voice. Emma, this is insane. You can't just come in here on Christmas morning and accuse everyone of. Of what, Sarah? Of fraud, of forgery, of theft, because that's exactly what they did. I pulled out the final set of documents. These are from the forensic handwriting expert I hired. The signature on the estate documents isn't mine. It's not even a good forgery. Jake stood up abruptly. Okay, fine. Yes, we knew about the will, but you have to understand. Jake, Dad's voice cracked like a whip, but it was too late. Understand what, Jake? I asked quietly. My brother ran his hands through his hair, looking like a man who'd been carrying a secret too heavy for him to bear. You were so busy with your career, living in Chicago. You never came home. Mom and Dad needed help with the funeral arrangements, with settling the estate. It seemed easier to just handle it. Easier to handle it by stealing from me. It wasn't stealing, Jake exploded. You didn't even know what she'd left. You would have just sold the house anyway and blown the money on your fancy Chicago lifestyle. The mask was finally coming off. My fancy Chicago lifestyle? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You mean my studio apartment and ramen dinners while I paid off student loans, while you were living in a house Mom and Dad bought you? That's different. How is it different, Jake? Because I have a family, I have responsibilities. Sarah was pregnant, we needed help. And I didn't deserve help. I didn't deserve the inheritance my grandmother specifically left to me. Sarah jumped in, her voice shrill. You always act like you're so much better than us, Emma. Like your college degree makes you special. Maybe if you'd gotten married and had kids like a normal person instead of chasing some fantasy career. Sarah, my voice was ice cold. Stop talking now. But she was on a roll, years of resentment pouring out. You think you're so successful with your little newspaper job, but look around. Jake and I have a real life, a real family. We needed that money to build something meaningful. You needed my money to build your meaningful life. Jake put his hand on Sarah's arm, trying to quiet her, but the damage was done. She'd said what they all really thought, that my life, my career, my choices were less valuable than theirs, that their need trumped my rights. Dad finally found his voice. Emma, we can work this out. We can pay you back over time. With what money, Dad? The money you've been spending on Riley's Christmas gifts? The money you spent on Jake's house, his car, his wedding, you've been living off my inheritance for 5 years. Mom looked up through her tears. We were going to tell you eventually. When I was 40, 50, when you were dead and couldn't face the consequences. We were protecting you, she whispered. Protecting me from what? From feeling bad about taking money when Jake and Sarah needed it more. The audacity of that statement left me speechless for a moment. They had convinced themselves that stealing from me was actually a kindness. You were protecting yourselves, I said finally. You were protecting your ability to keep favoring Jake without having to face what that favoritism really cost. Riley had been sitting quietly through this whole exchange, but now she tugged on Jake's shirt. Daddy, why is everyone yelling? Did you really take Aunt Emma's money? The question came from a 5-year-old with no agenda, no justification, just pure innocence asking for truth. And somehow, that innocent question hit harder than all my accusations. Jake looked down at his daughter, and I saw something break in his face. Riley, go play in the other room for a few minutes, okay? But Daddy. And now Riley. She looked between all the adults, her lip trembling, and ran out of the room. I heard her footsteps on the stairs and the sound of her bedroom door closing. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of damaged relationships and exposed truths. So what now? Dad asked, his voice hollow. What do you want from us? I looked around the room at these people who had shaped my entire life, who had made me feel invisible and unworthy for 32 years, who had stolen from me and then convinced themselves they were the victims. I want you to understand what you've done, I said quietly. Not just the stealing, though that's bad enough. I want you to understand that you've spent my entire life making me feel like I didn't matter, like Jake's happiness was more important than mine, like my achievements meant nothing while his mediocrity deserved celebration. Emma, Mom started. I'm not finished. My voice cut through her attempt at interruption. I want you to understand that every Christmas morning when I sat here watching Riley get showered with gifts worth thousands of dollars while I got an afterthought from the clearance rack, I was watching you spend my money. My grandmother's love for me, converted into favoritism for Jake's family. The truth hung in the air like smoke from a fire that had been smoldering for decades and finally burst into flames. I want you to understand that when I struggled through college working 3 jobs while Jake got a free ride, when I ate ramen for dinner while he got a house, when I won awards that you ignored while celebrating his every minor accomplishment, all of that happened while you were sitting on money that was meant to be mine. Jake was crying now, real tears of what might have been genuine remorse. Emma, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. We never meant for it to go this far. You never meant to get caught, I corrected. There's a difference. Rate this confrontation 110. Have you ever had to expose family lies like this? Comment below. I put all the documents back in the box and closed it carefully. I've already consulted with lawyers. I could have you prosecuted for fraud, forgery, and theft. I could sue you for the full amount plus interest and damages. I could destroy your credit, your reputation, your relationship with your neighbors and friends. The room went dead quiet again. But I'm not going to do that. Do you know why? They stared at me, afraid to hope, afraid to breathe. Because I don't want your money anymore. Simply. I don't want anything from any of you anymore. From people who don't have it to give. Mom's face crumpled. I'm done pretending that this dysfunction is normal or acceptable. I'm done being the forgotten daughter in a family that never wanted to remember me anyway. I walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back. I'm going to give you all a gift today. I'm going to give you exactly what you've always wanted, a family without Emma in it. You can have your perfect little unit, Mom, Dad, Jake, Sarah, and Riley. You can continue your patterns of favoritism and enabling without anyone there to point out how toxic it all is. Sarah had started crying now too, though I suspected it was more about the potential legal consequences than any real remorse. But I want you to remember something, I continued. Every time you look at this house, every time you see the things you've bought with money that wasn't yours, remember what it cost. Remember that you had a daughter and granddaughter who loved you, who tried for 32 years to earn a place in your hearts, and you threw that away to maintain your comfortable lies. I opened the front door, cold December air rushing in. Emma, wait, Jake called out, scrambling to his feet. We can fix this. We can pay you back. We can make this right. I turned back one last time. Jake, you can't pay me back. Not because you don't have the money, though you don't, but because some things can't be fixed with money. You can't pay back 32 years of making me feel worthless. You can't pay back the childhood I spent wondering why I wasn't good enough. You can't pay back the damage you've done to my ability to trust people who claim to love me. Then what can we do? He asked, and for the first time in years, he sounded like the brother I'd once loved instead of the entitled manchild he'd become. I considered the question seriously. You can be better. You can stop the favoritism with Riley. If you have more kids, treat them equally. You can get therapy to understand why you needed to steal from your own family member to feel secure. You can learn to value people for who they are instead of what they can do for you. And you, Mom's voice was barely audible. What about you? I smiled, and for the first time in years, it felt genuine. I'm going to be fine, Mom. I'm going to be better than fine. I'm going to build a life surrounded by people who see my worth without me having to prove it constantly. I'm going to have holidays filled with joy instead of obligation. I'm going to stop carrying the weight of your dysfunction. I stepped onto the porch, then looked back one more time. Merry Christmas, I said. Try to make it count. I drove straight home to Chicago, 3 hours of highway giving me time to process what I'd just done. My phone started ringing before I'd even reached the city limits. Mom, Dad, Jake, even Sarah calling repeatedly. I let them all go to voicemail. The first message was from Mom. Emma, please call us back. We can work this out. We're family. The second was from Dad. Emma, Catherine, you come back here right now. We need to talk about this like adults. Jake's message was different. I know I screwed up. I know we all did. Please don't throw away our whole family over this. And Sarah's, Emma, I'm sorry if I said things that hurt your feelings, but you can't just destroy everyone's life because you're upset. I deleted them all without listening to the rest. But revenge, I realized, wasn't going to come from anything I did to them. It was going to come from what I didn't do. The first part of my quiet revenge was financial. Within a week, I'd liquidated my savings and put a down payment on a beautiful 2-bedroom condo in Lincoln Park. I'd been living modestly for years, saving money partly out of habit and partly because I'd never felt secure enough to spend it. Now I understood why. Some part of me had always been waiting for my family to need me, to ask for my help, to finally see my value. That part of me was dead now. I bought furniture that I loved instead of furniture that was practical. I hired a decorator to help me create spaces that felt like home instead of just places to sleep between work assignments. I booked a trip to Italy, something I'd been promising myself for years, but never quite justifying the expense. For the first time in my adult life, I spent money on myself without guilt. The second part of my revenge was professional. Without the constant emotional drain of trying to maintain relationships with people who didn't value me, my work flourished. I took on bigger investigations, wrote deeper stories, won more awards. 3 months after Christmas, I broke the story that would define my career. A massive corruption scheme involving state pension funds that led to federal indictments of 12 officials and the recovery of $50 million in stolen taxpayer money. The story ran on the front page of newspapers across the country and earned me a Pulitzer nomination. My parents didn't call to congratulate me. They didn't even know about it because they'd never paid attention to my work before, and I certainly wasn't going to start sharing my successes with them now. The third part of my revenge was personal. I started dating again, something I'd barely done in years because I'd been so focused on trying to prove myself to my family. Without that constant background stress, I found myself more confident, more open, more attractive to the kind of men I'd always wanted to meet. I met David at a journalism conference in Washington. He was a documentary filmmaker, intelligent and kind, with the sort of quiet confidence that comes from actually accomplishing things instead of just expecting praise for existing. When I told him about my family situation, not the details, just the general dysfunction, his response was perfect. Their loss is everyone else's gain. We'd been dating for 2 months when he said something that crystallized everything for me. Emma, I've never met anyone who works as hard to earn things that should be freely given. It's like you're constantly trying to prove you deserve basic human decency. He was right, and for the first time in my life, I was in a relationship with someone who gave me that basic human decency without making me work for it. The fourth part of my revenge was social. I started building the chosen family I'd always craved but never thought I deserved. My editor, Patricia, became a mentor and friend who actually celebrated my achievements. My neighbor, Mrs. Chen, a retired teacher, became the grandmother figure I'd lost when Rose died. My college roommate, Jessica, who I'd reconnected with after years of being too ashamed of my family dysfunction to maintain close friendships, became the sister I'd never had. These people saw my worth. They valued my company. They remembered my birthday and asked about my work and cared about my happiness. They gave me what my blood family never could: unconditional acceptance. Have you ever had to build your own chosen family? Tell us about it in the comments. But the most satisfying part of my revenge came from an unexpected source: Aunt Linda. She called me in March, 6 months after that terrible Christmas morning. "Emma, I need to tell you something else about your grandmother's will." My heart sank. "What now, Linda?" "There was a clause I didn't tell you about. A clause that Rose made me promise to keep secret until you'd had time to process everything else." "What kind of clause?" "She left a letter for your parents, to be delivered only if they ever stole from you or treated the inheritance dishonorably. She made me promise to watch how they handled things and decide whether they deserved to see it. And I think it's time they saw it." Linda had waited until she was sure my parents weren't going to confess or make amends on their own. Now, 6 months later, with no word from them about repayment or even a genuine apology, she decided to deliver Grandma Rose's final message. She read it to me over the phone. "To my daughter Margaret and son-in-law Robert, asterisk. If you are reading this letter, it means you have betrayed Emma in exactly the way I feared you would. It means you have stolen what I left her and justified it to yourselves somehow. I am not surprised. You have been stealing from Emma her entire life, stealing her confidence by ignoring her achievements, stealing her security by favoring Jake, stealing her peace by making her compete for scraps of your attention. Emma earned this inheritance through years of love and care when the rest of you forgot I existed. She earned it by being the granddaughter who called, who visited, who remembered birthdays and holidays. She earned it by becoming a woman of integrity despite your poor example. If you have taken what is hers, you have proven yourselves to be exactly the people I thought you were: small, petty, and incapable of love that doesn't serve your own purposes. You raised one child to believe the world owed him everything, and another child to believe she owed the world everything. Jake will never be happy because nothing will ever be enough. But Emma will find happiness because she knows how to create it for herself. I am ashamed to call you my daughter, Margaret. I am ashamed that my son-in-law would participate in stealing from his own child. But I am proud of Emma, and I hope this inheritance helps her build a life far away from your toxicity. Do not contact her about this letter. Do not try to justify what you've done. You have made your choice, and she has made hers." With disappointment and disgust asterisk. Rose. Linda mailed them the letter that same day. I never heard directly about their reaction, but Jake called me 2 weeks later. It was the first time any of them had tried to contact me since I'd stopped answering their calls. "Emma, please, we need to talk." "No, Jake, we don't. She's not doing well since that letter came. She's barely eating, barely sleeping. She keeps saying Grandma Rose hated her." "Grandma Rose was disappointed in her. There's a difference." "Emma, she's our mother." "She's your mother, Jake. She made it clear that I was just an obligation she had to fulfill." "That's not true." "Isn't it? When's the last time she asked about my life, without it being followed immediately by news about yours? When's the last time she celebrated something I accomplished? When's the last time she treated me like I mattered?" A silence. "Jake, I hope Mom gets help. I hope she learns to live with the consequences of her choices, but those consequences aren't my responsibility to fix." "What about Dad's? What about him?" "He wants to pay you back. He's been talking to lawyers about liquidating some investments." I don't want his money, Jake. Then what do you want? I want nothing from any of you, that's the point. More silence. Emma, what about Riley? She asks about you all the time. She doesn't understand why you don't come to family things anymore. That hit me in the chest, as Jake knew it would. Tell Riley that Aunt Emma loves her very much, but sometimes grown-ups make choices that mean families can't be together anymore. Tell her that it's not her fault and that she should focus on the people who love her and treat her well. As she misses you. I miss her too, but I can't have a relationship with Riley without having one with the rest of you, and I'm not willing to subject myself to years more of your family's dysfunction just to see my niece occasionally. So that's it, you're just done with all of us forever. I thought about that question seriously. Was I done forever? Could I imagine a scenario where I'd want to rebuild these relationships? Jake, if you want to have a relationship with me, a real relationship, not one where I'm expected to be grateful for crumbs, then you need to do the work to understand what you've done. Not just the money, but the patterns that made stealing from me seem reasonable to you. What kind of work? Therapy, real therapy, not just a few sessions to check a box. Individual therapy to understand why you felt entitled to money that wasn't yours. Family therapy to understand the dynamics that made our parents think favoritism was acceptable. Marriage counseling to figure out why your wife thought it was okay to mock me for asking about my inheritance. And if we do that, then maybe, in a few years, we can have a conversation about whether there's anything left to rebuild. But Jake, I need you to understand something. I'm not the same person I was 6 months ago. I'm not desperate for your approval anymore. I'm not willing to accept breadcrumbs and call it love. If you want me in your life, it has to be because you actually value me, not because you feel guilty about what you've done. I do value you, Em. No, Jake, you value the idea of me. You value having a sister who doesn't cause problems, who doesn't ask difficult questions, who's grateful for whatever scraps she gets. You don't value the real me, the woman who has boundaries, who expects to be treated with respect, who won't accept less than she deserves. That conversation ended the same way all my family conversations had for months, with me hanging up in them, having to face the consequences of their choices alone. It's been a year now since that Christmas morning, and I can honestly say it was the best gift I ever gave myself. I'm writing this from my new condo, looking out at Lake Michigan, preparing for another holiday season. But this year is different. This year, David and I are hosting Thanksgiving for my chosen family: Patricia, Mrs. Chen, Jessica and her husband Mark, and a few other friends who have become more like siblings than my actual siblings ever were. Tomorrow, I'll cook dinner for people who celebrate my presence instead of tolerating it. I'll share stories and laughter with people who ask about my work because they're genuinely interested, not because they're waiting for their turn to talk about themselves. I'll give thanks for a life built on authenticity instead of obligation. Last week, I got a letter from Riley. Jake must have helped her write it because the handwriting was too neat and some of the words too advanced for a 6-year-old, but the sentiment felt genuine. Dear Aunt Emma asterisk. I miss you a lot. Daddy says you're not coming to Christmas this year either. I hope you're happy where you are. I saved you a drawing I made of us together. Maybe someday I can give it to you. Love, Riley asterisk. P.S. Daddy's been going to talk to someone about feelings. He cries sometimes now, but he says it's good crying. That postscript gave me more hope than anything else that's happened this year. Maybe Jake is actually doing the work. Maybe he's starting to understand what he lost when he chose to steal from me rather than treat me as an equal. But even if he is, I'm not waiting for my family to fix themselves before I live my life. I've learned that happiness isn't something you earn by being good enough for people who don't appreciate you. It's something you create by surrounding yourself with people who do. I've also learned that family isn't about blood. It's about choice, commitment, and care. It's about people who show up for you not because they have to, but because they want to. It's about relationships built on mutual respect instead of hierarchies determined by birth order or gender, or whose needs seem most urgent. My biological family taught me what love isn't: conditional, competitive, and demanding. My chosen family has taught me what love is: generous, consistent, and freely given. What have you learned about real love versus family obligation? Share your thoughts in the comments. The other thing I've learned is that revenge isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about freedom. Sometimes the best revenge is living so well without toxic people that you forget why you ever wanted their approval in the first place. I don't wake up angry anymore. I don't spend my days rehearsing conversations I'll never have or imagining scenarios where my parents finally see my worth. I don't check their social media or ask mutual acquaintances for updates about their lives. I've genuinely moved on. My career is thriving. My relationship with David is deepening into something beautiful and stable. My friendships are rich with people who actually know me and like what they know. My home is a sanctuary instead of a place where I hide from my loneliness. I'm not saying it was easy. There were nights when I cried for the family I'd always wanted but never had. There were moments when I wondered if I'd made the right choice, if I should have tried harder to forgive them, if cutting them off was too extreme. But every time I doubted myself, I remembered that Christmas morning. I remembered Jake's entitled anger, Sarah's cruel dismissal of my life, my parents' complete lack of remorse. I remembered 32 years of being made to feel invisible, insignificant, unworthy. And I remembered Grandma Rose's letter, the grandmother who had seen my worth even when my own parents couldn't. 3 months ago, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a check for $50,000 and a note in my father's handwriting. "This is a start, we're sorry." I tore up the check, not because I didn't want the money, but because I understood what it represented, their belief that this was a financial problem that could be solved with partial payment. They still didn't understand that the money was never really the point. The point was 32 years of systematic emotional neglect. The point was a family system so broken that stealing from me seemed reasonable to them. The point was that they valued their comfort over my rights, their convenience over my dignity. You can't write a check for that kind of damage. But here's what I've realized in this year of freedom. They didn't just steal money from me. They stole something much more valuable, years of my life that I spent trying to earn love that was never available. The real gift Grandma, Rose, left me wasn't the money they stole. It was the final push I needed to stop accepting less than I deserved. Her letter forced me to see what I'd been too afraid to acknowledge, that I was never going to be valued by people who needed me to be small in order for them to feel big. Now I'm surrounded by people who celebrate my bigness, who encourage me to take up space, who see my achievements as reflections of my character rather than threats to their comfort. Yesterday, Patricia nominated me for a major investigative journalism fellowship that would fund a year of research into corporate fraud. When I told her I wasn't sure I was qualified, she laughed and said, "Emma, you're the most qualified person I know. Stop acting like you need to prove yourself to people who already know your worth." That's the difference between real family and biological family. Real family sees your potential and calls it forward. Biological family, at least mine, sees your potential and feels threatened by it. I'm done feeling threatened by my own potential. I'm done making myself small so other people can feel big. I'm done accepting crumbs and calling them love. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and self-respect? How did you decide? I'd love to hear your stories. As I finish writing this, I'm preparing for David to arrive for dinner. We're cooking together tonight, something that would have seemed impossibly domestic and comfortable a year ago, when I was still carrying the weight of my family's dysfunction. He doesn't know the full details of what happened last Christmas. I've told him the basics, that my family stole money from me and that I've cut contact with them. But I haven't shared the deeper story of the lifetime of favoritism and emotional neglect that made their theft feel like the inevitable conclusion to a very long, very painful pattern. Maybe I'll tell him someday. Maybe I won't. The beautiful thing about healthy relationships is that they don't require you to carry all your trauma into every conversation. David loves me for who I am now, not for who I was when I was desperate for my family's approval. Tomorrow, I'll wake up in a home I chose, next to a man who values me, preparing to spend time with people who celebrate my existence instead of tolerating it. I'll cook food I enjoy eating, wear clothes I love wearing, and have conversations that energize me instead of drain me. It's a life that would have been impossible if I'd stayed trapped in the cycle of trying to earn love from people who didn't have it to give. So thank you, Mom and Dad and Jake and Sarah. Thank you for stealing from me so blatantly that I couldn't rationalize it away anymore. Thank you for being so cruel in that moment of confrontation that I couldn't pretend your dysfunction was just complicated family dynamics. Thank you for forcing me to choose between your comfort and my dignity, because it turns out that choosing myself was the best decision I've ever made. And thank you, Grandma Rose, for seeing me when no one else would, for leaving me a gift that was about so much more than money, for believing I deserved better and giving me the tools to demand it. This Christmas morning, I'll wake up grateful, not for the family I was born into, but for the family I've chosen, not for the love I never received, but for the love I've learned to give and accept. I'll wake up free. Before you go, I need to know, rate this story 0-10. Have you ever had to cut off toxic family members? Was it worth it? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, share it with someone who might need to hear it. Your story matters, your worth is not negotiable. And sometimes the best gift you can give yourself is the courage to walk away from people who can't love you the way you deserve to be loved.